are my friends. Come along with me, see how the story ends.
What's up, all you hippies and maybe professionals out there? Welcome back to another episode of the Professional Hippie Show. Hey, today we have an awesome guest for you. James, go ahead and give him a hi, hello. How you doing?
Howdy, everybody. Glad to be here with the Professional Hippies.
We are really stoked to have you on. And James is representing probably a whole host of things, but today we got you representing Bay Staters, which is an amazing organization. And if you're someone that's been following our show, obviously, you know we like to highlight a bit of professionalism, but also some examples of the woo, maybe somewhere in the middle of that. And James, I can't think of anybody that would represent that better than you, brother. The movement you're creating at a grassroots level is so potent for the psychedelic communities. And I think individuals that are looking for more purpose, more freedom, and that's what I'm really excited to dig in today, learning more about your story, how you came to be the founder of Bay Staters, like what that means, what that is, and the life that it seems like it's taken on of its own. It seems like it's growing legs. Like just getting you on this show, by the way, I think I spoke to multiple people. It's like, this is a side thing for you? This isn't even your full-time gig? Like this is just a passion project?
Yeah, brother. It got way out of control. It's one of those things where you're emailing your city council about your shroom trip, and next thing you know, you're leading a multi-state coalition to end the whole drug war. Just happens.
It just happens, right? Casual.
Just kind of happens. It escalates. Yeah.
They were like, all right, if you want to take on that challenge, we need someone to do it. You're stepping up.
Why not you? Why not now?
Right, exactly. And we started over LinkedIn. Of all the shitty social media platforms out there. It was a guy from Costa Rica who was just posting about how mushrooms changed his life. And I reached out and asked, like, hey, you should post about Massachusetts, because it was the thick of quarantine. I had nothing to do. Just got 5 volunteers together, put the logo together in an afternoon, and started sharing stories of hope with our local leaders. And a lot of them had done mushrooms too, so they were excited to work with us and normalize it across the state.
I can see why it would blow up on LinkedIn. I mean, that's more exciting than most of the stuff on there.
Yeah, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not the same old, same old. Well, kind of take us back before, because there's so many things that, even prepping for this episode, that I was curious and wanted to pick your brain on. So maybe if that's where it started, but kind of just take us through the inception of this and how you got to where you're at now, because I imagine there's got to be some twists and turns in there as well, right?
Sure, absolutely. So I guess the story really starts where my passion came from for starting the group. I grew up in a trailer park in Kansas, raised by a single mom there. And when I was about 5 years old, a methamphetamine lab exploded just a few doors down and caught the whole neighborhood on fire. So we had to evacuate the community, and it was my first up-close encounter with what we call the war on drugs, which is really more of a war on people. Going off to real fancy college in New York, I managed to get out of Kansas. I realized that a lot of my classmates were using Adderall just to manage the stress of getting their papers in and cramming for tests. And Adderall is only a few molecules different from the same methamphetamine that nearly blew up my entire neighborhood growing up. So the lesson I took away from that is that drugs are already legal in the United States. They're just legal for certain people, and they're legal for certain corporations to sell them to us. In college, I also went back to Kansas and led a sheriff's campaign. A guy who had actually grown up in the trailer park near me was a patrol officer that wanted to run on a platform of decriminalizing personal possession of all drugs. I thought I'd have a lot of resistance. It's a deep red county. There were a lot of Trump signs up in 2016, but overwhelmingly, even conservatives thought that criminalizing people for personal possession was, at worst, wasting taxpayer dollars, at best, making people's addictions and traumas even worse, putting them into a cycle where they were going to keep being a nuisance in the community. So those were some of my formative experiences with the drug war, and It ignited my passion to later try mushrooms in Berkeley, working for the city there, opening my heart and realizing all this intergenerational trauma I have from my grandfathers who were veterans, just drinking themselves into a stupor to deal with what they saw overseas, and passing that on to my mom, her passing it on to me, and I just want to break that cycle, and our organization wants to help other people break that cycle with psilocybin and other plant medicines.
Wow. So you went from basically being the poster child for the DARE program of like next door you can have an drug explosion next to you if you get into this, to then being an advocate wanting to decriminalize it. I'm just wondering what that, because you had to go through probably a lot of thinking and trying to figure things out from that point to some point in college where something opened up, that you wanted to be more open-minded about these. I'm just wondering, did it start with the explosion or did it start more down the road and you were just kind of more interested in learning about this topic then?
I think where a lot of it started too was trying cannabis for the first time in high school, an edible with one of my best friends who actually just implemented the world's first universal basic income in Taiwan. Really cool guy. We were just watching documentaries, smoking pot, being teenagers, documentaries on UBI, actually, one of the things that motivated him. But I just realized cannabis wasn't this big boogeyman that we'd been taught in school. It was actually a lot of fun. It helped me with stress. It helped me sleep at night. And that was really the undoing of the war on drugs for me, was experiencing, these plant medicines for myself. And my senior year of high school, I published an essay calling for the legalization of all controlled substances on the basis that if people are going to do them regardless, we may as well have a public health infrastructure that keeps people safe. And if people have a problem with them, let's get them the resources they need to get clean and be on a better path in life. And I was debating a school resource officer who said that marijuana lands you in jail, it's a gateway drug. And that sheriff, Chad Gay, actually ran for sheriff a few years later, and I went back to oppose him with Brian, my guy, running against him on a platform of decriminalization. So this has really been a lifelong passion. And back then I was motivated in large part because the war on drugs is an international war on people too. From FARC, from the Taliban, a lot of terror cells and a lot of insurgency groups actually make money selling these substances and use it to fund narco-terrorism. And then there's also U.S. government actors that get a lot of money for their nefarious projects by participating in the drug trade as well. So all of that underground money funds a lot of violence around the world from state actors and terrorist cells too.
Yeah, there's probably a million ways to skin that cat.
Dropping a lot of ideas. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so it sounds like the background that you have is really one, or the makings is something of like the traditional, like, hey, you're going to be well read, you're going to be well versed, you're going to take this smooth, oiled track in life, and that's kind of contradictory to what some of your passions seem to be in these experiences, right? So for you, it sounds like those experiences ultimately altered your outcome. And when looking to gain favor with communities or whole swaths of people that maybe haven't had those experiences, what would you say to somebody that hasn't had a personal experience and you're looking for them to give support to something that maybe propaganda or just their exposure has warped their perception of what should be legal and what should be controlled? Because they don't have a horse in the race. They have no intention. They have no desire. What would you speak to somebody that's like, well, how is legalizing these things going to be a good thing for anybody?
So the first example I'd give to anybody who would maybe never try psilocybin for themselves or hasn't thought much about it is the wait list we have for conventional talk therapy across the United States. There are therapists who have 10, 20 people on their list, And so it can be very hard for people to find one, especially the good ones. And the reason is we have millions of Americans struggling with treatment-resistant PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, and anxiety. And one great way to get people off those wait lists is to use something like psilocybin that can give those folks a little neuroplasticity to be able to work through their thoughts and intentions better with a therapist. And so what I would say to even the most, status quo normie that would never try something like this or has really just never even heard about it is this is going to revolutionize mental health care by making people better able to set goals and intentions for themselves using it at home, and then having an afterglow period that makes conventional talk therapy far, far more effective. Another example is our cities have a ton of people who live outside, who drop needles everywhere, who, rob their own families. I've had those issues within my own family with people struggling with substance use. Our conventional treatments are not working. Methadone, which is one of the main ones, is still addictive. You can still overdose on it, and it's very expensive for cities to provide. Ibogaine, which is a psychedelic from West Africa, it's a tree shrub, resets addiction to opiates just like that. And it's available in New Zealand, Mexico, Costa Rica, and other countries. Psilocybin itself, a single use, which doesn't cost very much at all, reduces the likelihood of opiate addiction by nearly 40%. That's a study that Johns Hopkins did and published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology just a couple years ago. It was a study of 44,000 Americans. That's not a small sample size. And so you don't have to use psychedelics. You don't even have to like psychedelics to know that this is going to be hugely beneficial for our cities and communities in terms of just the aftermath of the pandemic and the aftermath of this really stressed and overexcited world we live in today.
Yeah, well said, brother, by the way. I think I agree with all of that. But I'm just curious, like, hey, from your point of view, taking a very activist approach, right? Being very proactive. You're not just talking about it, you're doing it, right? And I want to hear a little bit more about, like, hey, what are the Bay Staters? Like, what is that all about? But what, from your perspective, what's standing in the way right now of getting this over the hump, so to speak? How come we're not there yet? Like, what's taken so long?
I think it's a great intersection with the name of the show. It's this idea that in order to use psilocybin or even talk about it is, unprofessional or unbecoming of people because of nearly 5 decades of stigma that were very intentionally cast upon cannabis and psilocybin. It's tragic because there's a lot of people who at the very top of their fields in science, mathematics, business, do use psychedelics and have benefited monumentally from their experiences. Everyone from Steve Jobs, not my favorite guy in the world, but a very interesting fellow, to Francis Crick, to just so many innovators have used these plant medicines to reach the top of their game and their fullest potential in life. And yet, I think there's just a pervasive unwillingness to talk about it. There's a ton of people in the state legislature in Massachusetts, for example, and in our cities across the country who have done mushrooms before. They just don't want to talk about it in public around their colleagues because there's a generation, age 60 to 80, that might, call them the shroom senator, the shroom, city councilor. And I think we just need to get over that and be honest about science, be honest about the sociology of how people use substances, and say 5 decades and really beyond that, just prohibition of substances creates violent cartels. It creates violent problems in our mental health care system, and we shouldn't tolerate it. It's destroying lives. It's wasting our money.
How is it frustrating when you are going from, trying to work on that transition, right? Because eventually it's going to happen where it is just becoming more popular, right? It's going to be eventually the norm. But like you said, there's just a whole generation where they have their own stigma where that they have about it, right? And that's why they don't want to push it forward. Is there a bit of frustration there, or do you just say we just have to have patience while working for it at the same time to make it
Yeah,
a standard?
it's a great question. I'd even say we have a lot of older people who love psilocybin too. So I mentioned kind of call out the boomer generation. A ton of those folks were using it around in the 60s, 70s too. I don't even think there's that much entrenched resistance among them. There was a Boston Globe poll on our work. 9 in 10 readers supported what we were about. And that was about like home growing and decriminalizing possession of even harmful substances, just in favor of treating it like a public health issue. So like you said, Dylan, I think we're in this kind of midway range where people are afraid to talk about the issue because of stigma, or, you know, even sometimes my mom, like, she'll be like, "Oh, are you using too much shrooms? You're being a dick," or whatever. You know, she'll call me out about something. But if I never talked to her about mushrooms, she would still, like, you know, give me the same grief about things. So I
Yeah.
think that it's a community where we do need to educate our friends so that they have a good first experience. If people are using, you know, like a higher dose at like a concert and they've never tried it before, they don't know what they're getting into, they might not have a very good time. It could be very stressful, which is why we're here to just educate peer to peer with our facilitator network, make sure people are doing it for their first time at home, you know, comfy blankets, water, someone who knows what they're doing. And then once you know how your body is going to react to this, you know, it is pretty powerful, especially in big doses. Once someone knows how it affects them, taking smaller doses to go see a concert, taking a smaller microdose to go on a hike with friends, I think that that's the type of culture we want to breed, and that's just going to happen peer to peer. In a way, there's no point in waiting for the government, because the government has managed to drop the ball on, it seems like, every single major issue at the federal level. We just everything's a crisis. Housing's a crisis. Like, I just don't see those types of people fixing this issue. It's going to have to be us, community by community, person by person.
You don't think our tax dollars are going to a good
Yeah,
resources? You don't
What do you mean?
advantage this for them?
You don't think they're doing a good job?
I'd have to have more information. No.
No, I don't. So, So tell. Just curious why too. Massachusetts, right? Like, this is a great area to get it started, but when someone, a lot of people, when they think of trying to get something like this going, they think California or New York, maybe even Florida, Texas, something with a huge population. But then Massachusetts has a pretty small, and they're just right. You're right next to like Vermont, those locations. I would think probably a pretty, I don't know. I haven't lived up there, but I would think a pretty red location, right? So just curious why starting with Massachusetts. Well, for your project.
Yeah, it's a great question. So Massachusetts is really not as woke as it makes itself out to be. Like, we have some pretty vitriolic, like, racism, classism, kind of like sneering at people like me from Kansas here. We have a lot of isms, but maybe they put on a more kind of like a veil over it. That they talk about identity politics, but then the Boston School District, for example, is one of the most segregated in the country because of its history here. And so I don't think it was like preordained that change happens anywhere. I think it happens from the hard work of a lot of individuals on our team that had the courage, like our veterans, to have rallies, all the volunteers, thousands across the state who were willing to like put their name on an email to a crusty lawmaker saying psilocybin changed my life. It wasn't an accident that it happened here, because it was a lot of hard work. And I would say culturally, Somerville and Cambridge, where you had Timothy Leary and Ram Dass teaching at Harvard and giving out psychedelics to undergrads, there's a good chance that just all the brilliant people that went to MIT and Harvard, we do have a lot of smart and musically talented people here in Boston. It is a real hub of thinking, innovation, music, and the arts, that a lot of those people tend to cluster around Boston. And then on the other side of the state, it's really, really beautiful out by the Berkshires. So you have a lot of hippies out near the Berkshires, enjoying all the nature up there. And so that is how we actually got our state bill filed. We had a coalition of a state senator in Somerville and Cambridge, that type of hipster area near Boston. And then we have a state representative representing Western Mass near the Berkshires. And so that history and that culture is likely why those two sides of the state in particular have clustered around, supporting our group and supporting our advocacy. That and just a lot of hard work, like thousands of conversations with strangers on the street. We got a table, thank goodness, that makes us look more official. But I remember when we first started out, I was walking around with one of my friends just in public parks and handing him a little slip of paper about what we did. And it was almost like, this is not what we said, but it was like, hey kids, you want to learn about mushrooms? But it was more like, hey, I'm James, this is Mackinson, we care about this, it changed our lives, so we just wanted to give you some information. That's how it grew.
It's like being on campus. You get the people with the slips. You want to come to church on Sunday? Except you're like, you want to actually see God this Sunday?
Yeah, you want to meet God.
Exactly.
Well, another thing I want to highlight here that's really important for folks listening and watching this is that it's one thing to say, hey, we're putting in hard work, but it's also really clear your hard work is translating into real results. So you guys have had, from the research, I have 5 different successful campaigns. Is that right?
Wow.
Yes. So we have gotten 4 cities to say they will no longer arrest people for growing and sharing psilocybin mushrooms and possession of all controlled substances. So they're going to treat that as a public health matter. And Somerville is the first city in America to completely dismantle its narcotics unit. So they have 0 police officers in the city of Somerville looking for people with narcotics-related issues. They only prioritize helping people if they have a problem. And in Worcester, which is the second biggest city in New England, we passed a measure with the city there recognizing these plant medicines benefits for first responders and veterans. So one really fascinating thing about us is we think that cops especially are one of the groups that need psilocybin and cannabis the most. They see people on their worst days. They have a ton of trauma from seeing dead bodies and just the worst side of human nature. And let's face it, a lot of cops are also kind of crooked, and a lot of them have personality problems, that lead to police brutality. They're enforcing laws that have a lot of structural inequities just baked into the system. That's really traumatic, and I think that first responders in particular could really benefit from these medicines too. So that's kind of separated us in some ways from, a lot of activist groups, is that we actually see the potential in this helping everybody. It's not some, radical ideology. It's neighbors being better neighbors, parents being better parents, lovers being better lovers, all down the list. Just people becoming more compassionate and kind versions of themselves.
What do you feel like separates just old-fashioned activism and something that's getting more grassroots results like what you guys are experiencing? What have you known be the biggest difference maker there?
That's a great question. So if you rewind, say, 150 years in U.S. history to when they got alcohol banned, it was preachers who would literally go town to town and stand on a literal soapbox and talk about the evils of alcohol. It was people like Carrie Nation from Kansas who would go into bars with an axe and just try to break everything because her husband was abusive due to his alcoholism. most big social change in America doesn't come from value projecting. It doesn't come from your nonprofit having a bunch of money. It comes from people to people interactions, real interactions and conversations in people's living rooms about serious issues and engagement on the streets. Social media has made us really lazy at achieving social change. We think that likes translate into people in power hearing us. And then we saw some of the biggest protest movements in American history during Black Lives Matter, but my boss was still getting way more emails from police unions and the state legislature than he was direct communications from his constituents. So people just don't know how to engage people who have power, how to build real connections with people around the issues they care about. It's become this kind of competition among nonprofits to put their brand on social change. So, for example, we almost had a bill pass last year in Massachusetts that would have created fines for all drug possession, and ironically increased the number of people, engaged with police, because right now a lot of police turn the other eye. They don't want to waste their time and money processing people if they have a small amount of something. But if you put fines into the mix, they actually have more of an incentive to look for that because it brings in revenue for the state and city. And yet that was called decriminalization by ACLU, by Drug Policy Alliance, a lot of these other bigger groups, and pushed without really thinking about the second or third order consequences of what fines mean for stigma, for policing for profit. And that's the type of lazy social change that nonprofit type groups engage in, is they just want to do the most politically convenient thing that was more or less going to happen anyway. Bay Staters, because when we started out, we weren't fundraising at all. We have like a weird mixed brand where we try to end the whole drug war, but we're called Bay Staters for Natural Medicine. Hell of a lot of people are confused whether we're based in the Bay in California or the Bay State, which is Massachusetts. So we were just going at it, just like having the conversations. We weren't about building a bigger brand. And so that just allowed us to do the right thing instead of the thing that pleases the donors or the one or two, wealthy people who often control a nonprofit advocacy group.
You're funded by passion, not by donations from people like that.
Funded by the passion, not from the pack.
Being. That's right. You're doing this, and the way you have it set up is it makes it more of a reason for people to want to trust your group and what you're doing. It's people like you said that this is your side gig, so you're going out and doing this on a separate time from what you're normally doing, and that's how passionate it is to you and your group to get it out there. And I guess when other people see that might not be doing this, they go, okay, if they're doing this on their side time, this guy is walking up to me in a suit because he just got off of work, but he's talking about this, but I've never done it before. There must be something a little to this, because I definitely thought that person would be wearing dreads or something in this instance.
Yeah. I couldn't pull off dreads, no way.
Yeah, it'd be tough for me too. I don't know. You mentioned earlier too, you were in Berkeley and you did mushrooms there, and then you came back over here to the Bay. Was that just because you were going to college over there and then just came back over here to live here for work?
That's a great question. So I was in Berkeley, California, because I was working for Stanford University very briefly. I hated the culture at Stanford. I was working at a research center on poverty that treated poverty not as a real thing I'd grown up in and seen a lot of people struggle in, but as this academic issue to be understood in the abstract. And I didn't like it there, so I quit that job. I'd graduated college. I was looking for something more in my life, so I drove my car up to Berkeley and did some couch surfing with friends, and they were activists throughout Berkeley, and I learned a lot from them. They were doing animal rescues in Berkeley, so they'd actually go on to a factory farm and just rescue the animals straight out. And had fun mixing with that community. I randomly met the vice mayor of the city through a friend of a friend, and she offered me a job working for the city and writing laws for them on environmental, like single-use disposables, all those cups we just throw away when we could use a glass one, had me just write policy for her. And I think somewhere along those lines, a friend offered me some mushrooms because I'd never tried them before. I took a little bit, and it was a magical night. I was walking down Shattuck Avenue, if anyone knows Berkeley, and the lights were bouncing off the water because it'd been a rainy evening, and I just saw couples like loving each other. Just there was good energy in the air, and that was a moment where I think I accepted love into my life for one of the first times, because you go through life with a lot of interactions where people aren't authentic. They're transactional. They're always treating you as something to serve their ends. And I just accepted that not everybody is like that, or at least they're not like that all the time. And there are genuine people who love me, that I don't have to push away their love. I can accept it. And I don't know, it was really life-changing because it's made my relationships with people a lot stronger. It really taught me we got one life to live, so discover what you're best at. And maybe that's not mushroom advocacy. I don't think I want to do this forever, but whatever you're good at, just find your passion, and don't let your job and what your parents think of you, or what your high school class or college class thinks of you matter. Just go out and do what you were made to do. And psilocybin is a great tool to get you in that mindset. You will be miserable if you just live by other people's rules your whole life.
Yeah, mic drop. Hey, just to segue this a little bit, and I know I'm like 5 seconds behind, so stick with me, guys. But give us kind of a rundown on what Bay Staters, we've kind of indirectly spoken about the movement, the cause, and the mission. But if you were to give someone that elevator pitch on what Bay Staters is, and some of the resources that are available, because it's really cool what you guys have available just on the website. So yeah, kind of take the reins on that.
Yeah. The elevator pitch I would give for Bay Staters is we offer free classes on how to make the most of your first psilocybin experience. We have free trainings on how to grow your own mushrooms. You can get a very simple mushroom grow kit for your first time, and in so doing help support the work and the free events we throw across the region and the advocacy we're now doing across 5 different states. So if you've ever wanted to grow your own mushrooms of any kind, we're here to teach people how to do it and make it super easy to get started. We also have what's called our facilitator network. So if you've ever had the urge to help other people, like work through trauma, like really work through a new vision for their lives, then we encourage people to apply. We're looking for people who are really compassionate listeners, who want to help other people who have similar energy achieve the best they can. And that doesn't necessarily mean sitting with them for a psychedelic experience, although we do that. It can also literally just mean being what we like to call a positive version of AA. So for Alcoholics Anonymous, you walk into the meeting and you talk about all the bad things that are going on in your life, or the alcohol has intersected with in your life, and it's really negative. We're kind of an inversion of that, where we believe that our brains, being so hardwired to focus on the negative all the time, need people who are mentors, not therapists, but just mentors that can talk you through what you appreciate, can help you get in touch with the environments that make you feel most at peace, and recognize those so that you can move your life, change your life to be happier, but also not just happy, but thrive, because you're going to always have days where you're unhappy. And any doofus can get endorphins and happiness from working out or eating oily food. But thriving, what I like to call eudaimonia, to use Aristotle's term, is this feeling of achievement that you've set out for over decades of your life and pouring your soul and energy into. So that's what the Facilitator Network's about. If you want to become a coach, you're not an employee of Bay Staters. We're not hiring. I'm not doing that paperwork. No way. You're not a contractor. We're just here to connect people who have really similar energies so that they can have a great first experience with psilocybin, a great, some people used it when they were a kid or a teenager. They want to use it when they're, older and more mature. We're here for that. We're here to be just mentors and guides to people who want that.
Hey, how did you come to want to offer this or take up this project? Essentially, like, hey, I know this has got to be sucking up a ton of bandwidth, right? So where do you draw the line around being the founder? Where do you draw the line for your own personal like sovereignty, like your own space? Because I'm sure this could get as big as you wanted it to get. I mean, this could suck up as much energy as you'd let it. So how do you kind of protect yourself?
That's a great question for anybody who just pursues their passion in life, because it can really interfere with relationships, with spending enough time with family, exploring your other passions, because we are people of multitudes, to quote Emerson. And so for me, I just have fun with it. Like anyone who is like toxic, and you will meet a lot of toxic people doing advocacy of any kind, people who are not really in it to help others, that are just really narcissistic, or, we just filed a bill that would decriminalize like 113 grams of mushrooms for people in Massachusetts. And there's still some people who are like, that's not enough, you suck. And I'm like, all right. Well, how about you all email your lawmakers and say that's not enough? Because that still helps. Like, still just tell them it's not enough. That's okay. But it's like...
Sounds like the cannabis community, almost. Like, it's not enough.
It's not enough. And the thing is, like, we're just having fun with it. We're doing the right thing. We're being lighthearted. We attract... your vibe attracts your tribe, and we get a lot of cool entrepreneurial people. And the reason I invest a lot of time into this is because I do meet lifelong friends outside of just the mushroom advocacy. I don't ask all my friends to sign the petitions and the emails all the time. I've met really amazing fellow musicians that I like to jam with for fun and go on hikes with. It's almost just a way for me to take a filter, so to speak, through millions of people in the world and find the gems for me, the people that are really like me and on my level of thinking. And so I just say I have a lot of fun with it, and just always keep it fun, keep it community based. Like, let's say your passion is all the trash that's thrown all over our communities. Like, there's just a ton of trash that blows everywhere. Nobody wants to go out and pick up trash for fun, but it actually probably could be a lot of fun with other people. Or if it's like a weird kind of competition to make a sculpture out of it to raise awareness, like just find a cause or something that pisses you off about the world and get a group of people together through the internet. It's an amazing thing to make it happen. And all of the techniques we've used through Bay Staters to pass local measures, you can do the same thing with any city and town in America. You can pass something that says, we should all chip in to pick up trash, or whatever the cause. Think bigger: climate change, overfishing, like, name your issue. You can do this in any city or town, step by step. So just have fun with it, and don't let negative people drag you down, because there's a lot of jealous people, a lot of people who are traumatized, who will always shit on your work because they're unhappy. So just smile, keep going. One of our tenets starting out as a group was losing is winning. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you. Ha ha ha, the shroom people, they keep emailing us. They've gotten thousands of emails from us. They stop laughing and they start reading the goddamn emails. And they're like, wow, these people, like, they didn't come to play. Like, they mean this. This changed their lives. And then they work with you and you win, right? So that's how it goes. Just keep a optimistic spirit. Learn. Let other people be leaders too. It's not just about you. Let other people come up with good ideas and listen to them. people ask me like, oh, you're the founder of Bay Staters, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't like to have a title either because I don't like title organizations. It's good to have leaders. Leaders are the ones who put in the work. But if your whole organization is like, well, who's in charge? How much money can we fundraise? Blah, blah, blah. You can get so much done without any money. You can get a lot of money done, a lot of things done with like just a few donations from the core volunteers. Go out and do it and meet people, meet real people.
And what would you say, you were talking about how a lot of people could get into it, right? And I think what a lot of people have that, what we've kind of repeated here, part of the podcast, Professional Hippies, is there are tons of professionals out there that are advocates for mushrooms, are advocates for psychedelics, that it's helped them for cannabis, whatever, but they are afraid to come out. And I think a lot of that is not really that, definitely in some that they think they'll be made fun of, but a lot of times too, they think it's going to hurt them professionally. They think, higher ups or their networks, they're not going to be able to do much when they're trying to move up in their career or whatever. And I know that's something personally I had even with starting this podcast, was doing that. And what I come to find out is no one cares. That as far as I know, for my circle, when I've talked with people that have also made the leap to go down this path, the most they really will get is like, yeah, they get made fun of a little bit because they're like, oh yeah, you hippie. But then all of a sudden people start taking them seriously, and it almost has felt people have looked up to them for doing that, because the people that are making fun of you either haven't experienced it but want to, and they're just afraid to do it. So I'm just wondering what for those that might want to start a Bay Stater, organization somewhere in another state, what could they do to maybe help overcome those stigmas that are holding them back, in their professional career or friends, whatever it might be?
Yeah. So I'm really blessed to have two things. First, a really fucking common name, James Davis. James Davis could be anybody. So when I'm mentioned in the media, I'm not that worried because I know at least like 10 other James Davises in this state. There's probably hundreds, right? So that's kind of a unique blessing that I have in doing this work. The second one is I'm from another state. Like, if I follow my face here career-wise, I can just go be a James Davis somewhere else and make it. I tried it in California. It was too expensive. Ended up moving back to Kansas. Ended up getting a job here. Like, I think just having this mindset of being willing to find a new network, find new circles as you evolve in your career is a really healthy mindset to have once you have stability. Because once you have stability, once you are at a level of income or savings, or you have a home, you have some certainty about your future, then you should be investing in your life's work and passion and making that leap. Maybe psilocybin, maybe it's something else. All the good ideas in history were laughed at. They were all scolded. So my advice is really bigger than psilocybin. Just like surround yourself with people that are going to be supportive of you pursuing your passion. If everyone else in the room is going to, mock you or look down on you for caring about psilocybin or using plant medicine, then honestly, you're probably in the wrong room. And there's a lot of professionals that are working for wealth management companies or working in finance, and that's important work. It's a financial system. It connects businesses. It gets local businesses capital. It has some importance, but some of our most brilliant minds are literally just writing algorithms that, like, on microseconds make trades slightly faster. We have so much human potential and brilliance that is just being used to move money around and make guesstimates trying to beat the market. And often they don't even beat the market. Still, like, investing in indexes, like funds, like, still beats it. So it's like at the point where we have global environmental challenges, where we have societal decay and more deaths from despair than ever before. We have more heart disease than ever before. We have all of these like huge hardships. We need leaders to be able to step away and say, I'm going to die with money in my pocket. I'm going to die with my inbox full. I want to make a change. I want to like live my purpose instead of just trying to one up the small group of people around me. You know, just trying to have the fancier thing to impress the Joneses. Because what we often do is we go to a job we hate to impress people we don't like. And I think that people should really get out of that mindset as soon as they have the stability to do so.
Very well said. And I know some of our listeners might be thinking too as well as you're advocating for these things, right? And you are making it to where the officers in the counties and the governments aren't going after people now in those locations. Somerville being an example, they're not going to find them for those things, right? So some people might look at, let's say, Portland as an example, right, that decriminalized everything. But we see it's, I would say, probably not working out so well at how they did it, right? It just seems like it. What's the difference here when you're looking at the way that y'all are doing it and then the way that they did it, right? Because you don't hear, I don't hear much of anything bad coming out of Massachusetts in related to this whatsoever. But you have a daily article that's written in Portland, Seattle, that it's in a negative connotation, right? So I'm just curious what you could say the listeners the difference would be.
Yeah, I think Portland is a really fascinating example because regardless of what you do with enforcement, these issues tend to cluster around certain cities. And what I learned working for the city of Berkeley is if Palo Alto, where Stanford is, isn't meeting its, responsibilities to build affordable housing and keep people, in a place where they can afford rent, those people move to Berkeley because Berkeley is more compassionate toward people who are unhoused. And the same way with Portland, it's not even necessarily the fault of decriminalization that there's so much like human misery and honestly nuisance, like people just, defecating there, like people doing drugs out in the open. It's disturbing to see, right? But that's honestly because they've probably been more generous, and then people tend to cluster around where those things are accepted. Like in Boston, it's an area of the city known as Mass and Cass, or Methadone Mile, and people tend to live there in tent communities because it's stationed near the methadone clinic. And also, if people want fentanyl or they want heroin, it's mostly fentanyl now, then they can get it there because that's where the drug dealers are, right? Mm-hmm. So the thing that makes us different is we don't want to decriminalize drugs and just forget about it. We think that everyone should be able to afford an ibogaine treatment, that everybody should have a roof over their head and a mental health counselor, and eventually psilocybin coaches. We are actually working with some local groups that, their members lived on Mass and Cass, lived outside in those tent cities, but used ayahuasca and used psilocybin to work through a lot of childhood trauma that was keeping them trapped in that addiction cycle. So you can't just say, oh, everybody use drugs, it's all going to be fine now, if you don't get to the root cause of why people are using them in such an unhealthy way. And you need wraparound services. You need mental health care. You need a roof over your head to feel stable. Like, just a lot of those people don't even get sleep. How can you function or get a job or become a better version of yourself? You can't even sleep because you're worried about someone attacking you in the middle of the night to steal your socks, to steal like a small amount of fentanyl you have. And so I don't think it's the fault of decriminalization that Portland has become such a disaster. I think it's a failure on part of the entire state of Oregon, the entire country of the United States, to treat substance use as a public health issue, not a criminal issue. And if Portland's nicer to people, they're going to end up on buses to Portland. It needs to be a wider regional coordination. And Oregon passed two measures, right? There was Measure 109 and Measure 110. So one put $100 fines for drug possession. The other one created, legalized psilocybin, legalized it. What that meant is some people who are going to profiteer off of charging people tens of thousands of dollars for training that we offer for free and better. Mark my words. Those people got to write the rules because they were put on some commission after that ballot referendum. So now there's 5,000 pages of regulations around who can grow psilocybin mushrooms, where you can use them. And just like with cannabis, a lot of people are not going to listen to those rules. They think they're bullshit. So they're going to grow their own mushrooms and share their own mushrooms. But what it did is set back this idea that we actually need teams of people who can mentor people in how to use Ibogaine in particular. We want Healthy Streets Outreach Program, Tapestry, these organizations in Massachusetts to be able to set up their own version of an Ibogaine clinic. Not just places where people can shoot dope and not get HIV. That stuff's important too. But where they can actually get rid of the withdrawal symptoms that come from opiate addiction. Like actually get people off these drugs instead of just a harm reduction model. So harm reduction is great, but if you're not fundamentally getting to the root of these people's traumas and the withdrawal symptoms that keep them selling their bodies, just living every second to get off of that withdrawal, it stops even being fun. They just need it so they're not in physical pain. Unless we're getting people off of that, decrim is not enough. That's just one small part of the puzzle.
I think a lot of people don't realize that almost what you're saying is there has to be standards in place when you're implementing these things. And a lot of people don't think of standards being in place for these types of things, right? Because they just think it's a free-for-all. There's no control over it. Whereas, no, that's actually what's needing to be brought to the table, are standards put in place. And when they are, that's when these things work well, right? I mean, just like alcohol, as soon as alcohol became legal, or even tobacco, all of a sudden standards had to be put in place so people weren't just Mardi Grasing it everywhere around the world at all times, right? And so that's what I think a lot of people forget, is that out there in Portland, there was no standards in place. They just said, let's just see what happens as an experiment, release it all, and then that's what it turned out to be. Where you guys are taking it step by step. We're going to put things in place first, see what works and see what doesn't, before we finally get to the piece where it's such a normal standard every day. Like, I can go here for help, or I can go here for a nice evening out.
Yeah. And ultimately, we just need our entire society to just invest more in social infrastructure and community to prevent people from turning to hard drugs and live in that kind of way. Adverse childhood experiences. A lot of kids are traumatized because their parents are in these cycles of addiction too. Or mom and dad, or just mom in a lot of cases, can't afford to keep a roof over their head. That's really traumatic for a kid to have to be in middle school and not know if they're going to be going to the same middle school in a couple months, or if they're going to get fed. And so something like, I could talk about that for a whole other podcast, but universal basic income to stabilize people, or even just people who are in the foster care system, stabilizing them when they become young adults, that'll keep a lot of people off the streets too. And you can't just treat this as a drug policy issue. It's a societal decay problem that we don't invest in our young people, and that a lot of Americans don't really see a bright future anymore. Like, fewer people are optimistic than ever, and we need to get a hold of that and actually put forward a vision where we can have a better world. And it's not going to happen where we have record levels of wealth inequality, while there's 10 million Americans that are going to be sleeping on the streets tonight in the cold.
I'm loving it. No, I mean, I think that's really powerful stuff, and it also points to doing things with a little bit of nuance, right, and expression, and allowing for autonomy. Like, that was a big kernel wisdom I just gleaned from what you're expressing there, James, is that like, hey, we've seen how it goes wrong. We see what doesn't work, but we also know that given enough freedom, people are going to disseminate. I had this thought today when I was in the airport, taking some Tylenol. I think it's something ridiculously low, like 7 or 10 Tylenol is enough to do some serious damage. And this is just a readily available pharmaceutical. So kind of looping back in what you mentioned earlier, it's just certain people determining who gets to profit off of these substances. And if I'm trusted to buy Tylenol at every corner gas station, grocery store, whatever, not too many people are going to want to take a blotter of God, whatever, and hop in the car and go drive around. It's just like, they're not going to want to do that. Now, will we have to mitigate some instances of, introducing it properly? Yeah, sure. But that's just, I don't know. Those are hurdles. Those are thoughts. And, hey, I know, as we kind of land the plane here, I know there's probably a million more things we could dig in with you on, but I just want to express my sincere gratitude on you coming on here. And it's really clear you're leading with your heart, brother. And if people want to connect to your mission and your movement more, what's the best place for them to find you guys and help out?
Yeah, thank you so much for those words of wisdom, Colton and Dylan. Acetaminophen is nasty. It's in Vicodin. It's in a lot of these opioids too. Acetaminophen, Tylenol. But yes, so if we don't have Tylenol, but you all can connect with us at Baystaters on any of the social medias, Twitter, Facebook. We're really into Instagram. So Instagram's a great place to stay in touch with what we got going on. You can check us out at Baystaters NM, as in natural medicine, baystatersnm.org. And if you're interested in starting your own chapter of Baystaters in any city, any country, wherever you are, we're happy to give you mentorship on how to do this advocacy, because we already have the book together. We're happy to just give it to you and teach you how to be advocates in your own community. And so thank you both for having me on, and excited to help some people heal with plant medicine.
Yeah. And just last question for you, James. We like to ask all of our guests this. If there was a question that more people that you wish asked you more of, what would that question be?
I wish people would ask more about music. That's what I do. I'm always curious what people are listening to, because just because someone's a hippie doesn't mean they're not listening to like classical music and stuff. You just find out a lot about a person by asking what their favorite song is, their favorite band. Yeah.
Did not see that comment. Awesome. That is an awesome thing to bring up, especially because too as well, you never know who. There's some people that would never think would be listening to hard metal rock, and then you're like, you really? Like, oh yeah, well I'm reading my textbooks. That's exactly what I listen to. And you're like, wow. But all right, everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of the Professional Hippies Podcast. Thank you, James, for coming on. I definitely see another episode here in the future. If you like this episode, please like, share, follow. Go follow Baystaters. They're doing big things. We're definitely going to be promoting it as well on our socials. And until next time, everyone, peace.